Hi, my name is India Nicole Burton, and I'm the National New Play Network producer in residence at Cleveland Public Theater, and also the co-line producer of Station Hope with the incomparable Beth Wood. I would just like to personally thank you all for participating and viewing this important discussion tonight. And I will also like to invite you to place comments and questions in the comment sections of any social media platforms that you are viewing from because there will be a Q&A at the end of the panel. And now I want to introduce to you our moderator of the night, Daniel Gray Kantar, poet, educator, rapper, mentor, all of the above, but most importantly, an incredible human being. So without further ado, Action is Hope, a panel discussion.
Thank you so much. Uh, this is a wonderful experience, and as most wonderful experiences are, they will be met with some moments of patience. There may be moments where sound is a little weird and where there's some pausing because of lags, but we invite each and every one of you to bear with us, and we thank you so much for being here with us. And joining us in what I know is going to be an amazing conversation with some incredible people who I'd like to introduce in this moment. I want to start with Myron P. Edmonds, who is a pastor at Grace Community SDA Church. And he will talk more about himself and his experiences in just a bit. Next, we have Ciara Freeman. Ciara is a teaching artist for the Center for Arts Inspired Learning. She's the co-founder of Outsiders Queer Midwest Writers Retreat and founder and curator of What's Good and the Black Hogwarts Poetry Workshop. And we also have the incomparable Dr. Yvonne Pointer, activist, philanthropist, humanitarian speaker, author, and Queen Mother. So we are all here for what I trust is going to be a wonderful conversation about art and activism. And you also can participate in this conversation by typing any questions or comments that you may have on the chat. Cleveland Public Theater, who is our wonderful host for Station Hope and this conversation, will also make sure that they capture those thoughts and questions and send them or feed them to us directly. So I have done enough talking. You did not come here to hear from me. I'd like to just go ahead and start things off at the beginning in the way that all beginnings should be. And I just want to introduce each panelist to talk a little bit about who you are and talk a little bit about maybe a question that we talked about yesterday, which is what is inspiring you now, or what are you most passionate about in this moment? I'm going to leave that open to anyone who wants to start.
Oh, well, good evening. I'll take a stab at it first. First of all, it's an honor to be here with all the panelists. We've gotten to know each other a little bit, and it's just amazing how God just puts people together to be able to have these conversations that I think are needed right now. Very quickly. The thing that's driving me right now is the self-determination and self-actualization of Black people, period. I think I have drifted between Malcolm and Martin, and right now I'm leaning towards Malcolm, just in terms of us being able to understand that we are capable of really taking our experience and not just selling it to the highest bidder for entertainment purposes only, but actually developing our culture for generations to come. And I feel like that happens best through opportunity. And I think that's what has been missing. And I think that's what George Floyd and this Black Lives Matter movement has exposed in this pandemic, where the whole world literally has to sit down and watch the struggle that we have been saying that we've been in for hundreds of years. And that struggle is the inequality of what it means to be an African American. the truth of the matter is, as I said yesterday, I often feel that being Black means that you are not American, and that there are many that feel that we are not American. I even had someone to tell me that I should go back to where I came from. Truth is where am I going to go? This is home. We built this place. And one of the things I wanted to share tonight is just a little bit of my background of why I'm so passionate about our own self-determination. I'm the only biological child out of 5. My mother and father, my father a pastor, my mother an attorney. I tell people all the time I didn't grow up in the hood. The hood grew up in my house. In that my parents adopted Black children from the hood. My mother used to work for HUD in the hood, passing out food stamps and government cheese and things of that nature. And throughout her journey there in that profession, we literally would just invite people to our home. We invite kids to our home. And through that process, we ended up adopting 4 other of my brothers and sisters. And one of the things that had to teach me and why I'm so passionate about this, there's about 3 things I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about education and opportunity for our people. I think the only difference between the current situation between Blacks and whites in America is simply opportunity. It's simply opportunity. We have been denied opportunities, but I saw how my parents sort of raised me in the midst of the hood, so to speak. We brought all these kids from the hood in our house, and here I am, this kid from the suburbs. Don't know nothing about that, but learned simply. The only difference was just an opportunity. And now my brothers and sisters are all doing very well, doctors and lawyers, et cetera, simply just because of opportunity. The second thing I wanted to just point out for our listening audience and our viewing audience tonight is I'm so passionate us utilizing Black and experiencing Black and not being ashamed of Black. I think what white supremacy and white nationalism has done, it has made us almost guilty to celebrate ourselves and to support ourselves. And for example, I'm wearing right now my shirt from the school in which I attended. I'm a big proponent of HBCUs and Black school, Black education. One of the reasons why is the third reason is because we don't know our history. And it took me to have to go to a Black boarding academy, one of only 2 in the United States of America, and a Black HBCU university, Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama, for me to understand who I was. And for what that did for me, just in closing, is our people go places where we are celebrated and not simply tolerated. It does something for our sense of confidence and well-being. And when we get to that place where we know not only where we come from, we can have a clear sense of where we're going. And I believe the sky is the limit for us. I have hope in Black people. And I believe that when we recognize who we are, that God will do some tremendous things in our culture. Thank you.
What I am most passionate about is that people seem to have found and utilized their voices. When my daughter Gloria was raped and murdered in 1984, and instead of grieving like the average, I guess people would say, Black mother, of which I was often criticized for, I used my voice. And sometimes people don't realize how much power they have inside their voices. So we would always take whatever was dished out to us and feel as if we had nothing to say. Well, at the time when she was murdered, I said, this is unacceptable. It's an injustice. And who's going to speak for her if I don't? So I am most passionate right now in seeing that people are using their voices. Now, I may not agree with the way that some of them are doing it, but at least I agree with the fact that they found their voice. And so that's what I'm really passionate about, that people are rising up and using their voices.
And Ciara?
Yeah, I didn't know whether or not you were going to jump in, Daniel. So, yeah, what I'm really passionate about currently is making space for Black voices in particular. And actually, one of the things that I was talking about earlier today in a class I was teaching was this idea that white privilege tries to make the Black body, the Black voice, the Black mind a monolithic thing, this one idea. It doesn't leave a lot of space for intersections. And when there is not a lot of space for intersections, it takes away the humanity of a people. So when they say Black is this and Black is that, and that's all that Black is, it's easy to dismiss individuals who also live the Black experience but are individuals. And as a Black queer, very nerdy girl that was raised in the hood, I had to learn how to make space for myself very early on. And in doing so, I realized how important it was to create space for others, that making the space for myself was not nearly enough. And I think that's a big part of the Black experience too, knowing that you cannot just make space for yourself, that when you get into a job, you've got to make room for the next Black person. If you get an audition, you are trying to see how many other Black people were able to audition for this role as well. And so what I'm very passionate about is making space, which is why I made Was Good, so that the kids that were like, well, my poetry is hood and no one publishes me, has a space to be published. For the Black queer people in the Midwest who are like, there are Black writers retreats, there are queer writer retreats, but there are no retreats where they're just for Black queer writers. So like just trying to figure out how to make space and what that looks like is what I'm passionate about, especially right now. I think space is necessary.
All right. So thank you all for that overview of who you are and what you're passionate about in this really critical moment. And it's allowed me to ask each of you really some follow-up questions. And even though some of these follow-up questions may seem directly specifically to one person, I really would like to invite everyone to respond if you can. This first question, I think, though, is generally for all of you. Things in this moment seem so overwhelming. There seem to be so many issues and so many different problems for us to try to tackle. It can be really difficult for somebody to not be scattershot and try not to take all things and identify what is best, what's the best route for them. How did you find what that specific thing was for you? And what do you recommend to others who may be paralyzed by this moment and may not know exactly what to do or in what place to be active? Does this question make sense? So I'll leave that open to anyone who wants to answer, because these are difficult times and it's hard to find your place in this protest moment.
I would say, if I might just go ahead and jump in, is if you follow what you are passionate about. So many people always ask me to be involved with maybe a cause or a situation, and I have to ask myself the question, is this what matters most to me? Because when you use the word scattered, that's very good, because the average one of us, we're all over the place. So we don't get an opportunity to focus on one thing. Like, I'm passionate about innocent children being murdered, regardless of the color of their skin. So I think if a person follows what they are passionate, and then the way that you find that, you have to be still within your own self. So we spend so much time trying not to be who we are, trying to get away from ourselves, till we don't want to come face to face with the person in the mirror. And that takes some time just to be still and ask yourself the tough questions. And most of the time, what you are passionate about is on the other side of what you don't want to do. So if it was easy, come on, as you talked about Martin Luther King, you talked about Malcolm X, you just ask them. They will all say the same thing. What their passion led them to a difficult place. So that's why people don't do it, because they want it to come wrapped in a neat bow and a neat package, and it's often not. But what makes you angry? What makes you mad? And then what are you willing to do about it?
Yeah, just in response to that, the needs are many. I mean, to answer your question directly, there is a lens that all of us, a worldview that all of us have that's unique to us, that should be celebrated, as Ms. Pointer pointed out. Each one of us, I believe, has a calling, has an assignment. And that assignment normally is birthed out of pain. It's birthed out of struggle. It's based on experiences where you saw injustice or you saw issues. And so, as I've said before, I can only be who I am. And what I have seen is that Black children in particular have had less than ideal circumstances in which to deal with life. Is this an excuse for failure? Not necessarily, given the fact that we've seen so many others succeed. But it just bothers me. It angers me. That's why it's a passion. That in one area of Cleveland, the educational system offers one thing. In another area of Cleveland, it offers something else. And in these United States of America, that just should not be. That based on my zip code or based on the color of my skin, I am basically in a certain socioeconomic position, and the struggle for me is different. And I just have learned that while even watching the George Floyd situation and the worldwide movement that has ensued as a result of it, there's only one thing I can see, Daniel. You might see one thing, Ms. Pointer might see something else, Ciara might see something else, but I'm gonna tell you what I see. What I see is, here we go again. This is simply the fruit of a culture in this country that sees Black people as less than, that presents Black people in a certain light. And it took this situation to sort of open up some folks' eyes as to what the issues are, even though many of us have been championing this cause for a long time. So I'm with Sister Pointer. The Pointer wants to be a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. I've been to a number of protests, and most of the protests I've attended in Cleveland, 50% of them have been people who are not Black. And so you begin to ask yourself, why is that? That's because we are out here speaking for those who cannot speak for themselves. And that's what I see. I see it now. I see it with the pandemic, because it's disproportionately affecting us, and it just bothers me. But it doesn't bother me to paralysis. It bothers me to action and to activity and to want to make a difference.
So I agree with every bit of that. I agree with every bit of what the pastor said, as well as every bit of what Ms. Yvonne said. I especially like to go back to what the pastor said about passion oftentimes being born out of trauma. My father was murdered when I was 16 years old, which is right around the time that poetry became my passion. It became my safe space. I also joined the Victims of Violent Crime during that time, which also taught me what it looked like to be an activist, and to find that intersection between activism and art. And I think it's hard, especially right now. I think it's a lot of trial and error to figure out what your place is in this America with what's happening now. And I think a lot of us, Black, white, and otherwise, are very, very afraid to make mistakes. We're very afraid to be wrong. And I think that inhibits us from a lot of progress. I think it's okay to mess up sometimes. I think accountability is what's necessary. So I like this idea of what's going on right now, especially in Cleveland, with a lot of the businesses, a lot of the organizations stating clearly, I am with Black Lives Matter. I am thinking about what my next steps are. I think we're all in the process of figuring out next steps. And sometimes when we get tired, we stop, we get distracted, we do other things. And right now, that does not seem to be happening. And that's something that I'm very, very excited about. So it's really a get in where you fit in movement. I actually have lupus. So the first time in my life, I was not able to protest as an adult. And that hurt me, like really, really big. And so I had to figure out ways that I felt like I was participating in a movement that was very important to me, without being able to be on the front lines. And I know a lot of people, especially because of the pandemic, were like, well, what can I do? There are a lot of things. There are places to donate. first and foremost. There are so many bail funds, so many organizations that still need money for Black people and people of color who are struggling, even more so during this time because of the economic disassociation between classes. So I think there are a million ways that you can still do things. If art is your way, you can use artist activism. Money is always necessary to any movement. So yes, go in your pockets, give money. I know I donate at least once a month wherever I can. I think it's just trial and error. Figure out what works best for you, and then do it. Like, get your passion, then do it.
Thank you all so much for those really very thoughtful responses. And a large part of what I heard from each and every one of you is the importance of understanding your story and drawing from your story in order to find your place in this moment and in this protest movement and moment. This next question is going to be it's designed specifically for you, Pastor Myra. But I do think we are all people of faith on this call, so I think that anyone can answer it. But Myra, and I want to start with you. The Black theologist James Cone, in God of the Oppressed, wrote, "I do think that it is impossible to do a Christian theology with integrity in America without asking the question, what has the gospel to do with the Black struggle for liberation?" And with this in mind, I wonder what you are thinking in this moment is the role of the Black church in this moment of liberation as a celebrated pastor and as an activist. I'm wondering if you can shed light on this question.
Man, I'm so glad you asked me that question. I'm just bubbling over inside, like wanting to address the faith community. I'm going to answer this in two different ways. First, you have the larger Christian community here in the United States. I have noticed most recently quite a few white evangelical pastors who have had to backtrack statements that they've made because they have not recognized how they have blinders on because of white supremacy. And so the larger Christian community, especially my white brothers and sisters, I think that denial in this country has eroded their ability to speak relevantly to our issues. They don't mind us singing. They don't mind us preaching. But when it comes to our struggle, they seem to be blind to it. And I'm noticing, and I want to say this, there is a fear of people acknowledging that they are racist because racism has always been attached to hate or to the Ku Klux Klan. But racism not only can be seen as hate, but it also can be seen as ignorance. It can be seen as privilege. It can be seen as systemic. When you consider that, the Black church's role has been the same since its inception. And that is that we are to fight for the oppressed. And it's not just the Black church's responsibility. And I appreciate the way you have couched your question, because the assumption is that the argument of social justice or a social justice theology, some would even argue that it's not biblical, that it's not the approach, it's not the response of Christians. And I'm talking about even Black people. Remember the history now. Martin Luther King had to convince Black pastors in the 50s and 60s to participate in the civil rights struggle because they thought it was anti-Christian to get involved in political matters. But we're not dealing with politics here. We're dealing with the message of Christ himself. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, to loose those that are in prison, to minister to those that are oppressed. Christ's ministry was a threat to the establishment in his day because he took the same approach of ministering to the least of these. And so it ought not just be the responsibility of the Black church to minister to its people, but any Christian that sees anybody that is being mistreated, subjugated, oppressed, treated as less than human, their conscience ought to be pricked that it's anti-Christian to remain complicit with my silence, but to be engaged in helping folks to come out of the situations that they're in. So my call would be a call to anybody that claims to love God, no matter what their denomination is, that you have a responsibility, not just the Black church, but everybody has a responsibility if they're a follower of Christ and a student of Jesus to be involved in helping the least of these. And that's why when we say Black Lives Matter, we're essentially saying that nobody matters. You don't mean it that all lives matter. You don't mean that if Black lives don't matter.
It would appear that the truth has been loosed. Dear beloved brother, I appreciate your passion and I appreciate the way in which you responded. And that question in part is a signifier to the fact that this conversation is happening in celebration of Station Hope, which is in fact St. John's Church, which was of course a place on the Underground Railroad. And it is why we are celebrating this moment right now. I want to take a moment to remind anyone who is watching this to feel free to type any questions you might have in the chat. And hopefully we will be able to get to your question or comment a little bit later. I want to also pivot and turn to you, Yvonne, because the Black women have always been the backbone of the Black church, Black women and Black mothers. And in this protest movement, in this moment, we talk a lot about the Black men and women who have lost their lives to gun violence. And we do not talk enough about the mothers who have to bury their children. And we don't talk enough about the support that mothers may need. As we talk about activism, what is the role that the mother plays? And how do we better support mothers in their quest to become more active as well? Does this question make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I am sitting here jotting down notes. And as Pastor Myra was speaking, I thought of the similarities to myself and to Mr. Floyd's mother, because my understanding was one of the last things he said before passing was he called for his mother. My daughter's homicide was unsolved for 29 years before I was able to come face to face with her killer. And during the interrogation, I wasn't there. It was on tape. They asked him, Pastor Myron, what was the last thing that she said? And he said she called for her mother. I don't want to break out in it, but she called for her mother. So when I heard that this man on the ground was calling for his mother, as a mother, I know how many years I had to deal with the guilt that I wasn't there to help her. I couldn't save her. I couldn't help her. I couldn't defend her. And to know that she was calling for my help was very painful. So over the years, let me tell you what God has done. When she was first murdered, all I felt was that I was a nobody, just a Black voice. Who would even hear me? I'm a single mother in the inner city. So God, by his grace and his mercy, he raised me up to a level where I had this voice. And then I was criticized for using the voice. It was like, who she thinks she is. You know, I'm getting all kind of flack. But wouldn't any mother do the same for her child? I mean, I'm just saying, here's an opportunity. I couldn't be there to help her at the action, but I can now help her after death. So the way that we can support Black women, Black mothers who lost children is by not bad-mouthing those who stand up, who rise up to use their voices to come against and combat this evil. You know, because God gave me the strength and I opted not to do the typical Black woman. Come on, you understand what I'm trying. I didn't go there. I used grace and intelligence and mercy. So we don't have to be labeled as acting white. You see this? Because we show that even in the face of adversity, we still have strength, and God will give us grace. So the way that we support any mother who has lost any child is by just refraining from criticism if she opts, if she chooses to show her strength. And before I go, I want to say that one thing this COVID-19 has done, Pastor Myron, it brought us back to what the church really is. See, we see now the church is not the facility. Huh? I said to somebody the other day, if Jesus was here and they came to him and said, Jesus, you can't leave the house because we're all on lockdown. You have to stay in the house. What do you think he would do? He would find a way to still get the gospel done. So some of us have taken this as a time out. We get to do nothing, but that's not the truth. Because we can't gather in the sanctuary does not exempt us from doing the work of God.
Yes, it is very important in this moment for us to understand, seek to understand these consequences. The consequences can be positive, or the consequences can be seen as potentially negative. And one of those consequences is precisely what you said. There are certain things that we now see about the temple of God. And the temple of God has been, has exploded in a good way, in a good way. I thank you. Part of that is about making space, the church as a place and space, and also the self as a place, guarding the self, caring for the self, caring for this temple that we walk in each and every day. Ciara, I'm really interested in the ways in which you are becoming an activist who is making space, who is making sacred space for yourself and others. I have two parts to this question for you. What does it look like for you to make space? And then, as the youngest person on this call, who in some ways is really sort of representing a youth voice. I know that's funny.
Because I just turned 30. I feel the oldest I've ever been in my life. So this is great. I love this. Let me be the youth voice again. Fantastic.
But it is true. This protest moment is dominated and is founded by people your age and younger.
Sure.
What do you need? What do you need as an activist from those of us who come from generations before you? What do you need from us in order for you to continue your activist work in creating 21st century safe spaces?
First and foremost, I want to say thank you again to Pastor and to Miss Yvonne, because again, one of the things that informs my art and my activism is actually listening to the generations before me. I am a big believer, if you do not understand where you come from, you have zero places to go. And my faith is a big part of what I do. I think, especially to be a young person in this movement, one of the things that the generation before us gave us, well, a lot of us, is a strong sense of faith. My grandmother still has me tithe every Sunday, even though she is going to church from her phone right now. Like, that's still a requirement for her. Like, there is no pausing and praising the Lord and participating in the space that is our church. And my church has taken care of me. When I was 16, I lost my father. My churches who came together, they helped bury my father. My church definitely supported me until I got out of high school and well into college. They participated in parts of the fundraising for me to go to college. Like, they really stepped in. And I think the Black church in particular has done a lot for the community, but it also has made a distance sometimes with this younger generation. And I think a conversation, especially that I would like to have with the Black church, is to have these conversations with the younger generation, and allow them to speak back. One of the hardest things growing up in the Black church for me as a young Baptist girl was not feeling like I was allowed to speak back or question much of anything. And I think that's important. That's an important part of the learning process. And especially now, I don't think that we know everything. This generation, we obviously don't. I know that we are trying very, very, very hard. And I think we need guidance. I really, really believe that. I think that despite being like, quote unquote, on the front lines, we still, I know that I would not think or be thinking about half the things I think about if my grandmother didn't think about them first and pass on that information on to me to think about it. What I'm going through is not much different than what she went through. Again, that's a big part of the problem. Like, it has not changed that much. And the fact of the matter is that generation before me made it to this generation to create me. So they definitely knew something that I did not quite know. And faith is a big important part of that, is just believing that you have what it takes, this world has what it takes to make it better for you and your children. And I think that's something that Black people in particular hold on to. And I think the youth needs more faith. I think we are scared and angry, and rightfully so. And sometimes, because it is overwhelming, it overshadows our hope sometimes, which I think is really important for this to be a Station Hope panel. Hope needs to be talked about more. I personally believe, and I think the reason why I don't get as tired or I don't get as overwhelmed as my peers is because my grandmother is always enforcing this idea of hope onto me. So I walk into these activist and artistic positions. Oh, I love to see you smile, Miss Yvonne. I walk into these artistic positions with hope, like on my shoulders, going into this, like with hoping that good intentions come out. So with that being said, I do the same thing when I curate spaces for myself. I think, who is this for? Who will it help improve? How will it help improve them? And like, what will the outcome be? Like, will this be something that can improve the next generation, or is this just something that will improve it for now? I think longevity is important. Daniel, I think what you've done with 12 is a great example of creating a space where it's longevity, where artists, especially youth artists, have a space where they can create, where they are heard, where they make space. So those are the type of spaces. I look at the spaces that the generation before me has made, and I look at the longevity of it, and I look at what it can produce and how long it can produce something. And those are the things that I put my effort into, things that are long standing, and that are helpful, that identify a problem and contribute to it in a hopeful way.
I want to thank you so much, Ciara, for that really very thoughtful response. And you could have spoken for much longer in your response. And with that in mind, I wanted just some quick commentary from me. And the reason that question I asked you, Ciara, is of such importance is because I really think it's important for us to understand the context that young people find themselves in. These young people are finding themselves in the crosshairs of a global health pandemic, a global economic depression, a deep-rooted racial cataclysm on a global scale, an environmental disaster that world leaders seem to want to ignore, and the apparent decline of the American empire, all at the same time. And so this is a lot. This is a moment that none of us alive have ever seen. And now this weight is on the shoulders of young people. I want to turn for a moment again to race, though. And this question I'm about to ask is for all of you. We are all people of color. We are all people deeply rooted in the African American tradition. And so we can have free conversation within knowing our tradition and having some understanding of that tradition. And there are whites who feel unclear about where they fit, what to do, how they should feel. My question for you all, and I've been asked this by folks, what is the role what is the role of white people who may see themselves as abolitionists in this moment? Uh, what part do they play in this protest moment from your standpoint? I think about Myron. I'm looking at you. You can't tell, but I'm looking at you because you mentioned whether you're Malcolm or Martin, and I remember the question being asked of Malcolm by a white person. Well, what can I do? And Malcolm real coldly saying nothing.
I'm not that much Malcolm.
You're not that much.
I mean, because we need everybody.
That's right.
This struggle, as you so eloquently described it, and I had not thought about it that way. Obviously, it's obvious that we see the worldwide movement for Black Lives Mattering, right? Then the pandemic, and then you listed some other things that are all happening at once, and the babies and the teenagers and millennials. We got Zoomers now. They're being born into this new reality. I see two things happening with my white brothers and sisters. I see two reactions, and I'm looking for a third one. All right. The two reactions that I'm seeing is I'm seeing guilt, right? I'm seeing a level of guilt. Anytime this is brought up, Robert DiAngelo in her book, White Fragility, she speaks of this, this fragile response just can't handle the race conversation. And I'm talking about dealing with it on a very real level, straight up saying that we have a white supremacy issue to the extent, and if I may use this as an illustration, that I have personally removed all images of white Jesus with blue eyes and blonde hair from my congregation and from my home, because it simply reinforces. Now we know his color doesn't matter, but why does it got to be white? You see what I'm saying? We live in a zeitgeist. It's a culture where even us as Black people consider ourselves as less than. We walk with it, we talk with it, and it's subconscious. And so I see white guilt, and then I see white rage and fear, what it really is. Fear of losing the power, fear of losing the control. What I'd like to see, Daniel, is white empathy. White empathy that drives them to education, drives them to saying, maybe I don't understand how deep this thing is. How could a white police officer kill a man while he's being filmed? I think the thing that's most egregious about the George Floyd situation is not that it happened. Everybody on this panel knows that this stuff has been happening. But the amazing thing is the cold sociopathic nature whereby you know you're being filmed. You know you're being filmed. And even as he's unresponsive, you remove your knee. To me, that's symbolic of what we are seeing in the culture. There's a culture, and this is beyond, for me, faith and church. All of us has a human nature that should say, when somebody is hurt, Miss Yvonne, that I should not stand by and do nothing. When I see somebody that has less than me, somebody that's disproportionately treated differently than I am, that should bother me to the extent that I would want to help them. So I would call for empathy from my white brothers and sisters. And not just sympathy, feel our pain and seek to learn how you can be a part of the solution.
I think a lot of white people need to come out their pockets right now. If I'm to be absolutely honest and transparent as possible, I think classism is a big issue in America. And a lot of people from my generation are asking for this. We're not even asking so much as we're demanding reparations in whatever way possible. Our healthcare is biased, our education is biased, everything is biased, and we claim to live in a democracy, but we really live like within the whatever definition of capitalism we are defining our country by these days. We live in a state of capitalism, and I think a lot of white privilege involves money and spaces, and I think white people need to give it up and step down. It's happening a lot in like in art right now, and I think it needs to transfer into education, into healthcare, into businesses. I know a lot of artists are like, you know what, I'm taking up space, and a Black person deserves this space, or you know what, I have been giving this money to this, and this is where the money actually belongs. I think we can feel and empathize and have sympathy all we want, but we really have to demand that white people put their money where their mouth is. Put your money where your empathy is. Put your money where your guilt is. Don't just be guilty, sis. Pay me. Pay me.
Can I jump right in and say, because I asked a question on my Facebook page the other day, and I said, who out there have white friends? You know, if you're black, do you have a friend that's white? And if you're white, do you have a friend that's black? And I only say that so that we can make sure we indicate that not all white people are bad. Because the worst thing that I hate is when somebody looks at me and judges me by the color of my skin. I am not bad because I'm black. I think that we need to not just throw a whole net out there, because I don't want somebody getting in the elevator with me as a black person and a clench into their purse, like, because I'm black, I'm getting ready to jack you. So I think that there are some who are guilty and they deserve to pay, but there are some who are not. Now, that's just my opinion. So I think that when I don't want to be judged, come on, Martin Luther King, by the color of my skin. So I want you to get to know who I am. And then another thing, you talked about empathy. And let's go back to a mother or a father who's lost a child to murder. You can say all day long, I know how you feel. But unless you walked in my shoes, you do not. So we might want them to understand something that they are incapable of understanding unless they walk in our shoes. So now the challenge becomes, how do we have a dialogue that's not volatile, that can get clarity? You know, maybe I think they had this thing some years ago where a slum landlord was forced to live in an apartment building that he had with rats and roaches and everything. And so once he lived there, he was more sympathetic with his tenants. But up until then, from his home in the Heights, he had no sympathy. So the question is, are we capable of getting somebody to understand something that they've never experienced? That's just my thought. And then when you were smiling, when you said about hope, you know, Monday through Friday, I go live with Hope Haven on Facebook, and I'll be jumping off shortly. But that's what it's all about. It's about hope. And I love your grandma for instilling that in you. So even though we know what the problem is, the solution is how we're going to instill some of that hope that Big Mama and them gave to you.
I'm so glad that you finished this part of our conversation with the four of us talking with hope. Dr. Cornel West says that this sense of hope is absolutely a necessary part of the Black Christian tradition, but he says it is also the stuff that makes American democracy work. We must have hope. And I'm so grateful that you closed this section out with this. My role in this conversation has been really to ask some opening questions. The rest, however, is up to you. I am not going to always ask the question you want. I'm not always going to ask the best questions. The best questions almost always come from the audience. And so we're going to go ahead and open that up. I'm going to invite you all, if you have questions or comments, to please type them in the chat. There have been a couple that have already been sent to me. This first question has been answered to a certain degree, but maybe you're looking for something specific. This comes from Anonymous. And Anonymous asks, what is some advice you give us on how to get involved in taking action? I know that you all have already really kind of said earlier in the conversation how you think it's how you have gotten involved and what you think others need to do that. But maybe some specifics is what Anonymous is looking for here.
Yeah, can I speak to that just for a moment? When you talk about action, it's funny. We've been called activists. I remember someone called me the activist. I was like, I didn't know what is an activist. What really is an activist? And we kind of have in our mind, we think Al Sharpton or something like that. An activist is somebody who uses demonstrative action to help solve a problem. And so, to answer your question, we need to clarify what the problem is before we can go about using our voice, using our influence, really, to make a difference. When the problem is convoluted, to me, if the problem is convoluted, then we won't really know how to respond with action. So in the present case, I'll just say in the present case, in our present season that we are in, if you were to ask me, and this is just my opinion, right? This is Myra, I'm not speaking for the panel, I'm speaking for myself. I think what we are seeing is we are seeing the fruit of white supremacy. Now, when we say that, that unnerves people. It sounds judgmental. It's hard. It's not palpable for people to handle that. But what we're simply describing is we're describing America. We're describing the culture of America where Black lives don't matter as much as white lives. Very simple. There's a disproportionate way of living that is given for whites than there is for Blacks. My wife and I were driving a few minutes ago before this started, and we saw about 15 white young men riding bicycles by Beechwood Mall. We immediately commented to ourselves, if that were 15 Black boys riding those bicycles, it would immediately invoke fear in some people, including some Black people. That's the society that we are living in. When I go inside Beechwood Mall with my master's degree, with my doctorate degree, and my church, doesn't matter if I have a suit on, doesn't matter if I have Tim's on. I'll be followed in Saks Fifth. I'll be followed in Nordstrom's. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Yeah. I've had guns pulled on me since I've been here in Cleveland. And so if you ask me, how do I get involved? I'm telling you what I think the problem is. We have an unfair society. And if you want to do anything about this unfair society, educate yourself about the issues that cause this unfairness. And you can use your influence. You can use your vote. You can use your voice. There's so many different ways that we can do this. And I want to particularly, again, and I want everybody to know I love everybody. But in order for Black people to come out of this pseudo-slavery that we are in of oppression, we cannot do it without our white friends. We cannot. We do not hold the power. We do not hold the cards. Last thing I'll say is this. I didn't realize that I was a male chauvinist until a woman had to help me to understand it. And I would almost go so far as to say most men are born with male privilege and a male bias until somebody helps us to see that we have it. And so, as Robin DiAngelo, not me, I'm not saying it, in her book, White Fragility, she says, if you are white and you are born in America, you're more than likely born with a white supremacist mindset. And so that doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean you're going to hell. It just means that you're ignorant and that you need to educate yourself. So I would start there, Daniel, if I might. I think we need to begin with reading, with researching, with figuring it out. I just finished officers training school for the Air Force. I'm a chaplain in the Air Force as well. One of the big phrases in the Air Force is figure it out. You go pick up a book. You go Google a website, get on YouTube, figure out what the issues are, and then leverage your influence to make a difference. But I don't think we have to spoon feed everybody as to what their unique role and function is in this time. To me, it's obvious. We have two classes in this country. It's Black and it's white. And hopefully, by God's grace, some folks will realize that they can make a difference in that. Thank you.
I think, can I say this before I have to jump off? I know you're really ready to go because I do have to leave. I think I love what you said about being a chauvinist, and somebody had to point that out to you. So I think what you're talking about is conversations. And the two people have to be willing to learn and to listen. That's like in a relationship. If you have one person that thinks that they're right, it's nothing you're going to say to them. Because the last time I checked, you cannot change a grown person's mind. So you need two people that are willing to at least open up to the conversation. When my daughter Gloria was murdered, the white detectives on her case could not understand me. They couldn't understand what was I livid about. Why was I so upset? They said, because this happens in your community. Black people are killed all the time. What's the big deal? And so I understood then that they didn't get it. And I spent a lot of time trying to convince them of the legitimacy of my grief, but it was to no avail. So I say to people, don't keep busting your head against a stone wall. If it's something you cannot do anything about, move on to something that you can, because there's enough out here that you could do something about. The problem is we wasting too much time on that which we cannot. So I'm not saying don't do anything. I'm just saying identify what you can do something about. And the other stuff, leave it alone. And listen, I love you. I thank God for you. Y'all want to come over to Hope Haven at 8 o'clock? I'll be there live. Thank you, Daniel. An amazing, incredible job. Myron, I love everybody. Thank you. I apologize I have to leave, but I'm going to my Facebook Live show.
We love you. We love you.
God bless.
God bless you.
I think I know how to do this.
Yes.
You got it, Mama. You do. Bye.
Bye.
I too would like to. Let me just say, it means so much to me, as especially as a young Black woman, to hear you say that I was definitely a male chauvinist, and someone, assuming a woman, told me that I was, and that I acknowledged it and moved forward. God, that is such a big deal. Also, as a pastor, again, I grew up Baptist, so I just want to get all these things out on the air, because I do also believe in giving Black people their roses. That's a big part of my activism. I don't feel like Black people are told enough by the whole community how necessary we are to society. And honestly, this America would be nothing without Black culture and its Black people. And it's a Black girl who grew up in the church. It is phenomenal to hear that you took down the pictures of the white Jesus, that you took down the pictures of the white Jesus in your home, that you acknowledge that you're misogyny. Like, for me, that is hope. For me, that is the definition of hope. For me, that is, I will be able to raise my children in the same church my grandmother raised me in, without this overlying fear of misogyny, this overlying fear of white supremacy dictating our fate. So one, that's super important to me. Two, I also want to say, I don't hate white people. I think white people are great. I got a lot of white friends. That's cool. I think all white people are racist, are complicit in racism. I don't believe there's any way to be a white person in America and not be complicit in some form of white supremacy. I do think that involves conversation and knowledge. I do think it is your responsibility as a white person to be informed. I do not think it is your Black friend's responsibility, your Black boss's responsibility, your Black husband, your Black daughter, your Black coworker. I think that is your responsibility. And I think conversations are necessary, but before white people engage in these conversations with Black people, they need to really figure out accountability and how to have these conversations without their privilege and their guilt directing the conversation. And again, I cannot stress enough how important it is to donate money, how big the classism gap is in America, and where Black people sit, like Pastor said, it's really it's almost very much a Black and white thing, and it has to be addressed. So I do think if you want to take action, the first thing you have to do is educate yourself. The second thing you have to do is take accountability on where you have been complicit in white supremacy or any other supremacy. And once you are accountable, and once you really hold that accountability, then it's time to take those next steps.
Thank you. By the looks of some of the chat here on Facebook, which I am able to see, I'm not able to see everyone who is joining us, but from the looks of the chat here, your words, all of your words are well received and are very meaningful to people. And I want to thank you all for contributing. I want to invite you all to continue telling us how you feel. Your voice does matter. and asking additional questions. Speaking of questions, I do have another one.
It's 8 o'clock.
Sorry about that. My computer tells me what time it is. I do have another question for you, and this comes from Ibram X. Kendi, who says, assimilation is racist. Do you agree? And is there any difference between America as a melting pot, which changes all of us, and assimilation, which only changes minorities?
Easy answer. Assimilation is the result of being in a racist culture, and one of the phrases that describes that assimilation is code switching. Everybody in here knows how to code switch, where we basically have been taught that when you are around white folks and you are in a white environment, that you act white so as to make white people feel safe. I guess one of the greatest examples of this is when a black man goes into an elevator and there's about 4 of us on there, and 2 of them get off, and I'm just left with the white woman, and she clutches her purse. And what I have, the trauma of just being a black male in America. So I'm just as afraid as she is, And so what do? Y'all know what I do. I code switch. I speak to her. I try to disarm her. I try to sound intellectual, articulate, so as to tell her I am not a threat. And I'm saying this kind of assimilation, it's not natural. It's unnatural. And they don't have to do it. They don't have to do it. They don't have to alter who they are in order to make us feel safe. And so I wish we lived in a world where everybody could be who they were and we could celebrate those things, rather than for us, especially as a people, where we have to capitulate in order to be accepted and make them feel safe.
I agree with every bit of that. I also just want to say, as a nerd, if you have not seen the Trolls movie, the second Trolls movie, Trolls World Tour, that is the whole conversation. I think you can use it to teach your children about assimilation and the harm that it can do. It basically is just, without spoiling this child movie for people, it is basically about pop music and how pop music borrowed from other music to create its own entity. And basically the pop trolls are like, it's great because we're all the same. Like, this is fantastic. This is what we want. And the funk trolls and the country trolls, they're like, nah, son, this is not right. We can be individuals. We can have our own culture. And that's how the best music is made. I think America has this issue where we say these things and we just really can't back it up. And I know it's a lot of countries that's like that, but I can only talk about my own, right? So America claims about this melting pot, this diversity thing, but we don't really do it. And again, like Ron, I go into spaces, even spaces where I'm invited. I speak at a lot of universities, a lot of Ivy Leagues, and I'm constantly code switching. I'm choosing the poetry that I read differently than what I would read at B-side here in Cleveland. It's not the same poetry I would read at Brown University. And it's simply because white people are there. And I feel like I have to reach this certain meter to be accepted into a society that I should be accepted in because I was born into it. So I definitely think assimilation is a part of racism, and I think it's hurtful not only to Black people but to white people, literally to all people in America. It is a hurtful thing to do.
Wow.
So thank you for both of those answers to Ibram's question, and I would just personally like to also add, Ibram, and to all others, if you want to understand a little bit more about what both Myra and Ciara have been talking about regarding assimilation, a person who does a really great job writing about this and how it has been interwoven in the fabric of the African American tradition is Leroy Jones, who wrote Blues People. I really highly recommend that book so that we have an even deeper understanding of assimilation and what it has meant for us in all elements of our culture. I want to close and thank you both again so much for this, and thank you to Cleveland Public Theater for providing this space for us to engage in this kind of dialogue. We thank you for your CPT, for your enduring commitment to change. And it's with that in mind that I'd like to close. I wonder for you both, since this conversation is about change, what does change look like for you? And I know that this is a bit of a tough question because, as Paulo Freire says, we really do not understand liberation because we've never seen it. And our attempts to think about liberation and to actually be in the act of liberating ourselves and others often ends up looking like reifying oppression all over again. This is because we've never seen liberation. But I'm going to invite you to answer this impossible question, which is, what does change, what does liberation look like for you?
Martin Luther King preached a sermon, and he based it off of the familiar story of the Good Samaritan. And in that passage, it just describes this man who's traveling, and then he's brutalized and beat up, and two religious people walk by him and do nothing. And then a not so religious person walks by him, shows him compassion, and takes care of his needs. And King asked two questions. He said, there are two questions that both of these characters ask themselves that define change for me as a religious person. As I'm trying to be more spiritual, I believe there's a difference. He said that the ones that walked by this man who was laying there brutalized, they asked themselves, if I help him, what's going to happen to me? He said that the Samaritan that ministered to his needs asked a different question fundamentally. He says, if I don't help him, what will happen to him? This is the shift. And, the change for me right now, I'm not going to put this on America. This is not, I'm not calling for a change for white folks or black folks. I'm looking at the man in the mirror. And what I believe that God is telling me in particular, Daniel, is, have you been asking the right question? Have you been asking, if I don't exert more sacrifice, if I don't give more money, if I don't yield more of my time, if I don't help more of our babies in the community, if I don't open up my church more than just on the weekend, thank God he shut us all down to reconsider what we've been doing for the past 200-300 years with church. The question I want you to ask, Myron, that represents change for you, is no longer asking, if I do this, how will it impact me? My reputation, how many members, who knows my name, how many followers? Nah, man. The question I want you to start asking and living your life by is, if you remain silent, if you don't do anything, what will happen to them? The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And I don't want to fall on that side. Personal change is where I am, bro.
So when I think about this, and Daniel, you know this, and most people who know me know that my favorite author is Toni Morrison. She is an Ohio girl, native of this Erie Lake. And when I think about change for myself personally, and especially for Black people, because that's been my focus right now, if I'm to be honest, and even more so Black queer people, it's the idea of living without this gaze. Toni Morrison talks a lot about not giving in to the white gaze, which basically means living your life as if white people are not directing it, which goes back to the idea of code switching. Toni Morrison is of the school of, you don't have to code switch. Her work doesn't code switch. That's what attracted me so much to her work, the dialect she chose to use, the fact that she tells our stories and she does not center white people in the stories. White people are not directing her narrative. And Toni has a few quotes that I think I kind of mumble to myself, a few of them that I plan to tattoo to my body that I really think speaks to change. One is, if there is a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, you must be the one to write it. So I think that speaks to change. If there's something in this world that I want to see and I haven't seen it, I do less complaining and more thinking about how it is I can bring about that change. Another one is, if you want to fly, you got to give up that shit that weighs you down. And again, since my father was murdered, I've carried a lot of trauma with lupus. Just a lot. Being a young black hood girl from Cleveland, it's not been an easy ride of it. But I let shit go. I allow myself to go into my young adult fantasies. I allow myself to watch cartoons. I allow myself escapism. I do not deny myself happiness and joy just because trauma is in my life. And then finally, and this is one I really love. It's called "If You it says if you surrender to the air, you could ride it." And I'm gonna tattoo that. That's the one I'm gonna tattoo. And when she says, "If you surrender to the air, you could ride it," it's basically like if you give in to this idea of freeness. I like to go. I like to be in nature a lot. I go walk around in the woods. I go sit by the lake, and it's just a certain freeness that I don't think Black people are allowed to experience in America unless they create it for themselves. I felt it in Black spaces where I've been teaching. I felt it in Black churches. I felt it at Black retreats. And I think it's just this thing that we have learned how to create for ourselves, this sense of freeness. And so I do think we have to learn how to surrender to it. And once we surrender to it, we will ride it. We can ride this wave of freeness. And I'm a big believer in that. It's the school of Toni Morrison. It's the school of Zora Neale Hurston. It's the school of Audre Lorde and Octavia Butler. Read Black women. If you want, my change is reading Black women. My change is living these stories, trying to be as strong in my truth and in this world that I want to live in, and creating it piece by piece, and then inviting people into the world that I've created for myself, whether they be Black or white. So for me, that's what change looks like. It looks like finding out what the world you want the world to actually look like, and figuring out if you can create that world for yourself. And once you do, choosing who you want to invite in.
So I thank you both so much for those visions of change. And I also want to say that something is a little unfair. I think that Brother Myron dropped a little bit of his craft in his answer by pulling from the word. However, Ciara, we have not heard you perform your craft. And so I would like for us to close with you forming some lines that you are feeling right now from your own work to close us out. If you don't mind doing that.
Yeah, a line that I'm feeling from my own work.
Some lines. Some lines.
Some lines. How about this? I know right now, a lot of what I've been famous for with my work, and especially is timely right now because of the gun violence, has been about my father, and the poems that I do about my father being murdered. And recently, I've been trying to work on that narrative again, the gaze, and I want the gaze to be joy. That's the first thing I want people to think about when they think of me, instead of sadness and pain. And so because of that, I really been like pushing my mama poem to the forefront. In fact, I did it for Station Hope. And it's the poem that brings me most joy. And it's like a symbol of Black joy. And I want to leave it with that type of hope. So I'll do the very ending of that poem. Is that okay? Let's see. My mama's so Black. You sit her next to God and you can barely tell the difference. My mama, so holy. Duh, my daddy is a ghost. My mama, so bougie. She taught me not to talk about other folks' mamas. My mama, so Black. She gave her 3 daughters everything she got. My mama, so hood. She gave her 3 daughters everything she got. My mama, so poor. She gave her 3 daughters everything she got. My mama, so nosy. She nosy, y'all. But she kept me alive. Thank you. Being alive and being Black is important right now. So that's what I want to leave it with. Care about the people that are dead and Black, but give roses to the living too. The living deserve roses. So roses to you, Daniel, and roses to Myron.
Much love. You too. Daniel,
So,
are you gonna end with some poetry too, man? You gonna drop a bar? You gonna drop a bar for us, man?
Drop a bar, Daniel. You put me on the spot. Drop a bar.
I'm afraid we don't have enough time. I do want to say thank you to Yvonne, who had to jump off early. Thank you, Myra, and thank you, Ciara, for this wonderful conversation. My name is Daniel Gray Kantar, and on behalf of Cleveland Public Theater, I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this conversation about change. And I want to give a special thank you to India Burton, Beth Wood, Caitlin Lewins, Lauren Calavet, and Raymond Bobgin, Executive Director of Cleveland Public Theater, for what I think may be the 6th consecutive year of Station Hope and this first virtual experience. We certainly invite you to participate and join us tomorrow for a day-long experience of art, activism, and culture right here on this airway, Facebook, YouTube, and some others. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you have a good Friday evening. Peace.
Peace.